Hi, I'm April Little.
And I'm Anna Dowahair, and this is the Reclaiming the Garden podcast.
On today's episode, we're talking with Alicia Crosby, who is an incredible writer, speaker. She's actually spoken at the Evolving Faith Conference. She and I also happen to share the same alma mater, which we will get into in the first few minutes of the episode. Please bear with us, it's not all we talk about. We also talk about a lot about healing from harmful systems, both inside the church and outside. And she also, gets into some of her faith background, of course, and her coming out journey.
Absolutely. And one thing I do want to say as someone who didn't go to a historically women's college, the first part was absolutely fascinating to me. But on top of that, we do also go into the intersections of faith and sexuality and Christianity and where those meet and how those can become better acquainted.
Yes, we're so excited for you guys to hear this conversation.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Alicia T. Crosby, she, hers, is a justice educator, activist, and sometimes reluctant minister whose work addresses the spiritual, systemic, and interpersonal harm people experience. Through her writing, speaking, and space curation, Alicia helps individuals, communities, and institutions explore and unpack topics related to identity, inclusivity, and intersectional equity. You can follow her work via aliciatcrosby.com or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram via Alicia T. Crosby. Welcome so much to the show, Alicia.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So, of course, in addition to everything I just read, Alicia and I do share the same alma mater for our bachelor's degrees, Hollins University.
We love you, Hollins.
Yes, we do. That's from Bye Bye Birdie.
Yeah.
Seriously?
We love you, Conrad.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Anna, you probably don't know this, so that's sort of like a school chant. I bet it was like what happened is that like the theater probably did Bye Bye Birdie at some point and just changed things up.
It is probable.
Yeah, because in the musical it's We Love You, Conrad, and it's sung to like the Elvis-esque character in the show.
Well, we have a few of them.
Songs.
We have a lot of them. Chug a Beer is another one. I don't know if y'all were still doing Chug a Beer.
Wait, chug a beer.
Chug a beer like a hospital can. And you can't chug a beer like a hospital can, and you shouldn't have beer in your hand.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
My very last Hollins party, which of course was in March because COVID. I remember that was sung. I didn't know that was a Hollins specific thing.
It totally is. Everybody looks at me like they're like, "Are you?" Yes, and we don't just chug beer. We have chugged champagne. We have chugged wine because we're classy.
We chug an entire bottle of wine in a night, or at least certain traditions.
Sure, traditions after you graduate until like your liver is just like, can you please just no.
It's like, I can't do this every night anymore. Wait a second.
Look, I am in my 30s. I can barely drink a cup of anything if it's not tea.
That's totally fair.
Hollins gave me all the exercise I needed with that.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you're like, I'm good. But I can't believe you have so many school songs. I went to school for theater. We don't even have this many school songs.
It's because, it's a very spirited school. It's just, and I guess in our conversation, I'll be curious to hear how Hollins was also part of your spiritual journey. But first off, Anna will ask the first sort of question.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a real lighthearted one, kind of.
Okay.
Not really. I guess take us through your faith/spiritual journey. Like, what has brought you to here?
That easy one.
I know.
Particularly also,
we start things off lighthearted.
Particularly also background, because I know the feeling I get. Are you from some flavor of evangelical or
I'm evangelical adjacent. So I these days I go by ecumenically promiscuous. It feels real good. But yeah, I've got an interesting faith background, right? So I am a pastor's kid, PK for short. Those of y'all who know, you know. But I came up in the missionary Baptist tradition, which is a Black Baptist church tradition. But I also went to an evangelical Christian school from kindergarten through 8th grade. So this is where my adjacency to the evangelical world begins. when I went to college, the first church that I had gone to down in Roanoke while I was at Hollins was, Lord, it was an Anglican church. And this was around the time where the Anglicans and the Episcopalians had that messy breakup over the gays that I was not affirming back then. I'm super queer now, y'all. But back then, I was not. I was actually pretty repressed for reasons. And those reasons related to, like, you know, just safety and having, like, the scaffold, and I needed to, like, to be out and to live, like, in the fullness of my truth. And so went to the Anglican church for a bit, to a white Pentecostal church. I was in an evangelical church for a little bit. I was in another evangelical church where I worked for a few years, hung out with the Nazarenes, Reformed, Evangelical Covenant. I had a little season there. Hung out with the Methodists for a little bit. Went to a Catholic school for my first master's. Went to a Methodist school for the second one that I just left. But at some point, like when I had gone to Chicago, which is where I went to the Catholic school, Loyola University Chicago, it's a Jesuit institution, I realized, yeah, institutional church isn't for me. Like, shout out to, like, congregational spaces that convene. They are for some people, but, like, those people are not me. Like, I realized that my spiritual needs required me being in a space that let variety be the thing, and, like, let naps be centered, and, you know, involve French toast and things of that nature. And so, all that being said, it's like I have now I'm healed enough, because there was a lot of pain that was present in some of those spaces for me for many different reasons. But I'm healed enough to see the beauty and the benefit in people assembling in terms of, like, congregational space, but, like, it's just not where I live my best spiritual life. So yeah, ecumenically promiscuous. You've seen I've been around a bit. I got a good grasp on the church.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite the journey too, between all the different denominations. I'm curious to, and like from what you're saying, like, you don't necessarily identify with one or the other, but was there ever one that maybe you were a little bit more drawn towards, or are all of them just like, eh?
It's not, I don't even want to say it's like an eh thing so much as, like, these are things that are a part of me, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are, you know, I mean, the deepest parts of me are always going to be rooted in the Black Baptist Church. Like, that is the place of my formation. It's the place where I first got to know God, where I first saw community help. Like, it's honestly the place where I best saw community at times. But still, it's just not necessarily a place for me. But I've picked up things from, like, all of these different spaces and places, and those things are a part of my spirituality now. Like, you know, being, you know, with the Catholic fam, like, you know, things like, you know, icons, right? Like, that's not, like, a real big thing in, like, other, like, forms of Protestantism. But, like, seeing icons and, like, you know, and rosary and, like, having these kind of tangible expressions of faith that you carry with you. Like, I get that from hanging out with the Catholics. As well as, like, you know, the more high church fam, like, you know, with postures of, like, prayer and liturgy and whatever, like, those things have beauty, like, for me. And so I don't think that there's anything other than the church of my formation that's like, that's mine. It's like the church is mine. And I see, like, you know, beauty and goodness in, like, all these other places, even if they're not places that I have to root myself in.
Yeah, I definitely like resonate with that. As part of some of my journey, I've been exploring various parts of, like, some traditions, and now I'm kind of like, I'm a charismatic Methodist who sometimes uses prayer beads and, like, loves the BCP, or the Book of Common Prayer. Yeah, so
acronyms.
Taking things from different traditions is cool.
Yeah. I also really liked what you said too about having, like, especially in the Catholic Church, having tangible things, like, in terms of, like, the rosary and the iconography and everything. I just think that was, like, a really beautiful way of putting it, because I think in the evangelical realm, a lot of times that sort of thing is demonized, because it's like, it's a false idol, but, like...
and it's also I think it's also, like, part of the anti-embodiment sort of theology that runs in evangelical churches, too.
Yeah.
No, I would agree. And I think that that's part of why, like, I so value it and have to give, like, a shout out to, like, the churches, like, who have those things that are the kind of tangible expressions of faith, because that evangelical adjacency means that, like, part of my life, you know, in some of the churches as well as the schools I was in, it was taught that these things are bad. It's like, no, like they are, right? They're not inherently bad or good. They are. It's what
Yeah.
people do with them. In the same way that like evangelicals sometimes worship money, and like let's just keep it a buck.
Yeah.
Like some people have like, you know, a fixation like on an icon, and like, you know, but it's all about like how you hold something well, and how your connection to it like helps lend to your flourishing as well as that of others. And I think that that's kind of the metric of like whether it's good or bad, like, but it's kind of a morally neutral thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the notion that it just is. Like there doesn't have to be that like good or bad narrative like day and night. Like there is no binary in that. It just kind of is what it is, and it's just how people handle it.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of things in our world are that way, and unfortunately it's like, you know, I mean, one of the things that like I do in the world is I talk about religious trauma, and like one of the things that's like most heartbreaking to me in the world to see these things that have become like a good in someone's world turn to something that like hurts them, and then it completely
Yeah.
warps what that thing like is able to do like in their lives, like whether or not they can contact it anymore without becoming like, you know, actually triggered because there's trauma now surrounding that because of the violence they've
Yeah.
endured. And that's a hard thing. But yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think aside from, you know, violence or even something being like lauded and like and esteemed and holy or whatever, like things, objects can be like morally neutral. It's about the value that we assign them, and like sometimes like, you know, the things that are dearest to us may not necessarily be something that has a lot of meaning for another person, and that's okay. Matters to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a need to demonize those things of like, how
Mm-mm.
dare you do that? Like again, I think whatever brings us closer to the divine in a pure way is fine by me, and I think it should be like everyone's way of worship is different, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, like everybody's connection to God, like it's God, the divine, the universe, like how it is that like you call on the holy. Like it's all different. We all have different needs, and I think we have to make a lot more room for that than we do.
Yeah, so you mentioned your part of your work is like related to some, I guess, things related to religious trauma. I'm curious to hear more about like that, and also particularly some of the research that you did. I guess some of the research you did at Duke was related to that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like my thesis was actually it was looking at religious trauma through the lens of like racialization, like within Christian imperialist spaces. Because I think whenever we get to a place like where one culture is like, you must follow these cultural impulses, like I'm like that's imperialism. Like you're trying to like make everybody like march to the tune of the same drum, and that's not okay because there are cultural distinctions, and there's like diversity, and like there's need for people to be who they are because God made them be that way. And that forcible alignment is imperialist practices. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But, you know, my journey to like talk about religious trauma um, starts officially, I'm going to say in like 2013. So like back in 2013, which I realize is like 8 years ago, it's like, sweet Jesus, where does time go?
Yeah.
But back in 2013, I was working as an educational advocate for a civil rights org back in New York, which is where I'm from. And I had a number of my kids come out to me, and this is like before I was out to myself. But the thing that was kind of universal in my kids coming out was them sharing that I was the most religious person that they knew, and they wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to like abandon them or anything in their coming out. And I was like, what? Like it just was inconceivable to me. Even though I had dealt with my own degrees of repression and seen bias and whatever, it's like these are my babies. Like what? Like people are treating you some sort of way because you're like queer or you're trans. Like what is happening? And that made me start asking what is happening in the church around LGBTQ exclusion, and like making me like wanting to delve into it a lot more like fully. And like I grew up in a pretty conservative family. And to some degrees, like my parents still have their own degrees of conservatism around different things. But I just, by the nature of like really people sharing stories with me, my politics started to change. And so by that point, I was like, this is unacceptable. And so, yeah, like I started thinking about like how social justice needed to meet Christian practice. They should go together, but unfortunately, as we know, they don't. Not always, not for everyone. But all that being said, that made me actually go get my first master's, which is a master's in social justice, and that's the one I got at Loyola. And my very first project was looking at like the exclusion that LGBTQ kids were dealing with, specifically like kids and youth, and how like their families were a microcosm of the church in either supporting them or being, you know, perpetuators of harm. And so, yeah, that work has just like kind of evolved like over the years, where I'm looking at like all these facets of identity and how people are either like held or harmed by the church because of it, and as a result of the violence that they have endured, how that creates, you know, conditions for trauma, and then what does life look like for them after having trauma and having to like live with and deal with it.
Yeah, because it's a surprisingly large percentage of the queer community does identify as like Christian or Christian adjacent. And one thing that always sticks out to me is that Bible passage of how like we're like the body of Christ and it's many units and they all have different functions. And when we ignore queer Christian people, that's ignoring a huge part of the body of Christ. Like, and the more that people are ignored, like the more people are ignored in that body, like it's no wonder that people are just leaving the church in droves, because it's a very specific way to quote unquote be a Christian when there is no right way to do any of this.
I mean, it really isn't, other than not be an asshole. Like, that's
exactly.
not it. But, like, literally, I'm convinced at this point, the only thing that is unifying in, like, Christendom is there's something we like about Jesus. That's it. Literally. Yeah. It could just be a name. We just like the name of Jesus. And, like, everything else in your life is crap. But, like, there isn't any other unifying factor, because, like, Christianity is just so freaking, like, diverse. There's just...
Yeah,
so many parts of us.
You think about like Mike Pence, and then you think about like the whole other end of the spectrum. Like, and it's like, you know, some people in liking Jesus like to use his name for power in nefarious ways.
I mean, you see, I just said they liked the name Jesus. I didn't say that they were using it in a positive way. But like, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the only thing that we have in common. And like, but you know. And this isn't in defense of Mike Pence. Please understand this. Yeah. The unfortunate 100%. Thing is there are some Christians though who believe that they need to be in relationship with like warrior King Jesus, and like, you know, and I think that like the Pences of the world are kind of like that, right? Like Jesus has become this kind of odd, also like abiblical. Like this shit, it's just not. Yeah. It's not. At all textually sound. Not Jesus of the Bible, but like they see him as being like their like Avenger. He's like Captain America Jesus. Yeah. And like that's what they're into, and it's like, okay. I mean, like I'm down with the Jesus who is not just flipping tables, but was teaching a message so compelling that people had to remove roofs from houses in order to hear it. Like, you know, who like completely was like changing the world by sitting at dinner tables. Like, that's the Jesus that appeals to me. Yeah. Who also just happened to be a brown Palestinian man who was executed by the state.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I definitely, in the United States, we definitely have, it's that same thing of, like, warrior Jesus. It's, like, warrior, patriotic, Caucasian Jesus, when none of those things are in any sort of translation also, of the Bible.
Capitalist Jesus, even though...
I know.
Jesus who makes it rain? Yeah.
Jesus that doesn't want universal health care.
Who was just, like, healing people on the side of the road for $3. Like, what? Make it make sense. But this was also
healing people regardless of their religious beliefs is also something that's not pointed out.
And with consent. That's another thing.
Yes,
like people don't talk about the consent present in Jesus' ministry, because Jesus always asked people. Like, I can go on a whole tangent about that one. But all that being said, like, you know, I think though people holding these many different examples of the Jesus who they see and the Jesus who they feel drawn to isn't just based in, you know, biblical literacy. Like, that's definitely part of it, because some people genuinely don't read the Bible and just, like, they only hear about things by, like, you know, virtue of people doing, like, story sharing and, like, preaching and whatever. But it's just, like, you know, some of it is people putting their worldview on top of, like, what the text actually says. Like, you not, like, I don't know. There's just certain types of forms of Jesus you're not going to make sense to me saying with the scriptures. And we can go translation for translation. And different translations do say different things. However...
Well, the ironic thing is that, you know, some churches like that also, like, try to say that they're having the one real truth and that, like, their interpretation is the right interpretation, and they're kind of completely ignoring cultural context. Like, it's just so weird.
But, I mean, this is where we have to talk about, like, things like imperialism, right? So, like, this is why, like, my project was what it was. Because, like, I don't think that there's some things you can get away with if you don't speak about how empire functions, like, just the mindset of empire. Because, they don't want to talk about, like, the cultural specificity of Jesus. Or what, like, M. Sean Copeland calls the marked body of Christ. Shout out to the Catholics, they do good stuff. But, like, M. Sean Copeland speaks about the particularity of Jesus, like, in her work. And... other churches, particularly, let's just call things what they are. White churches do not want to have this conversation because it means reckoning with the fact that, like, Jesus is somehow dissimilar from you, but also you find, like, deep resonance in this message for some reason.
Yeah, one thing that really sticks out to me is Rob Bell kind of was talking about how, like, Americans today, and specifically, like, white evangelical Americans, can't identify with the Bible because the Bible was written by people who were under oppressive rule. Like, they were under the Babylonians, they were under the Romans, they were under all these different oppressive regimes. But we've become the world superpower. Like, the United States is the world superpower. We are the empire, and that's why, like, we, and not like we as in us three, but like that collective, like, the Bible isn't going to have that same resonance because, like, America has become that power.
But I think your social location matters here, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
Raphael,
100%.
He's totally, like, white evangelicals or ex-evangelicals.
Yeah,
love
100%.
Him. I don't personally have a lot of utility for Rob Bell because I'm a black woman. Like, those stories of liberation, like, make a difference for us. And so it's like, yeah, sure, America could be the superpower, but, like, black folks, black queer folks, black trans women are still getting killed at, like, astronomically high rates.
100%.
Police brutality is still a thing. Poverty is still what it is. And so it's like, when we talk about that we got to challenge, like, what that we is and who that we is for, because that we doesn't include all Americans, because some of our Americanness is hyphenated.
Yeah, and definitely, like, I definitely want to, like, absolutely agree with you. Like, I definitely, when I meant we, it was definitely the white, conservative, heterosexual
it's the white
church.
Church that's the empire.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna push back on this. It's not even just the white evangelicals, because white progressives can get the smoke too. Like, part of the challenge, you know, and this is a thing that, like, I'm just gonna call it what it is. I've received more crap from white progressives and letting them know, like, you two are complicit. Because, like, when folks still, okay, maybe you don't call it, like, missions, but you're still calling it humanitarian work. And there's a social hierarchy that, like, exists when you go from a community that isn't yours into another and try to be like, but we're helping you. Or when people are telling, like, folks, hey, this isn't the way for you to stand in solidarity with me. You aren't my ally. I determine who that is. There is a defensiveness that's there. And so until those things are, like, laid aside, it's like, no, all of white folks, the entirety of whiteness by nature of itself, and the social hierarchies that exist because of how racialized oppression, like, functions, like, it's not just conservatives. And I think that I'd be remiss in not saying that, because some of the worst hate I have seen has been from white, not even just, like, liberals, but also radicals, because people don't like to admit that they're wrong. Oh, hell yeah. At least, like, look.
Thank you for that good reminder. Because, like, I was thinking about, like, the idea of white exceptionalism, but, like, the idea that it's only the conservatives, only the bad people is, like, white exceptionalism.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's totally a thing. And, like, I'm telling you, it's bad. I mean, I've received, like, death threats from, like, white liberals. I never got that issues from white conservatives. I mean, they get upset, but, like, they stay upset kind of where they are. But, like, I have had people yield to fragility in ways where I've had people scream in my face and, like, talked about imagining ending my life and, like, all this stuff. And those have been progressives who want to talk about ending white supremacy. It's like, y'all.
What the?
It's so common. Like, there's not a person of color who you're going to talk to who has, like, nothing but sweeping things to say that are joyful about, like, white folks as a whole. I'm just going to be real with y'all on this show.
Yeah, it's...
I mean, thank you for being real with us. We want you
absolutely.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, I mean, but this is, I think, where, like, when we have conversations across, like, racialized, like, lines of difference, it's important to understand, like, that when folks are speaking, like, you know, and sharing stories of vulnerability, like, from communities of color, like, the assumption can't be made that it's just white conservatives. Like, it's like, you know, where people stand, like, when they're, like, you know, very clearly your adversary, and, like, that's its own degree of challenge. But the difficult thing is when people call themselves your friend and still yield to fragility, still resort to violence, still try to bypass you, still try to tell you what you're feeling isn't valid. That's the type of pain that, like, you know, you don't expect. And so some of us who have come out of more conservative environments, you know, and, like, looking to be in more progressive spaces have had to deal with that very unique heartbreak. That's not all that unique at all. It's just that we don't know that others are going through it too. It's part of why I'm speaking on it.
Like, that's just so, that's, like, so frustrating. Like, I obviously, I don't have the same experiences that you have by a long shot, but it's just, like, to hear those things of, like, you've been, like, kind of threatened, I guess, by, like, the white progressive community. Like, that's so ridiculous, because I feel like there's such a thing of, like, no, like, we need to be holier than thou. It's like, no, we need to listen to people. Like, not talk over. It's like,
people just honestly need to... People need to deal with their crap, and they need to heal. And I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. Like, whenever, like, folks are, like, in a place of, like, yielding to fragility, it's about, like, them not healing their own wounds.
Yeah.
And I think that this is part of, like, where, like, books like My Grandmother's Hands are so important, right? Like, when people have this conversation about, like, racial violence and, like, the way that, like, all of us have wounds, right? Like, not just people of color. White folks have their own wounds. Like, progressive, conservative, as far right or as far left as, like, you can go, there's still pain. Like, when you have benefited from a system that you... just like an unearned system of privilege and power, that still comes with its own degree of wounding. Like, the wounding may be shiny. It may be, you know... It may be, I don't know, decked out with the trappings, like, of whatever status, but it's a wound nonetheless.
Yeah.
And we all need healing. Like, we all need to, like, not be immersed in this crap. It's a lot.
Yeah. You talking about that kind of reminds me of something that you posted on social media, I guess relatively recently, maybe like a few months ago. You talked about how, like, some folks in the deconstruction community, I guess, were maybe conflating the terms deconstruction and decolonization, and, like, you know, you pointed out that sometimes people are deconstructing but not doing the work of decolonization. And I think that was a really interesting point.
Oh, yeah, more often than not, they're not decolonizing. Like, they're taking apart the house, but not asking if they're, like, on occupied land. They're not asking questions about, you know, how am I complicit in these systems, and how do I unwind myself from them and reorient, like, the way that I live. They're not doing that work. By and large, like, and I hate to say it this way. It is what it is. Actually, I don't hate to say it. I'm just going to say it. Yeah. That some folks are making a personality trait out of deconstruction. Look, a lot of us have gone from a place where we believed one thing and believe something else now. It doesn't mean that has to be your whole personality. Like, I'm deconstructing and I'm just mad about everything. It's like, okay, then, but what do you believe? And people aren't at the place where they're doing the work of constructive theology. Because, quite frankly, as a part of, it's cathartic to, like, vent. It's cathartic to trash a system that you came from. It's a lot harder to be like, all right, crap. The house is down. I've taken everything apart. What do I want to keep? What do I need to all the way throw away? And then what do I have to go looking for to build something new? That's really, like, that's the, like, the hard labor. Like, not to say that the other labor isn't hard, but that's a harder work to do. And folks got to be ready to do it. They have to want to do it.
Yeah, because I think it's pretty easy, especially with the reconstruction, to become almost jaded, which is, that's understandable, but it's also, no, like, okay, everything's like, what do I actually believe about this? Like, now that everything, now it's never actually like a clean slate, but it's an empty slate nonetheless. And it's like, okay, everything's gone. What do I believe? And having to kind of form that for yourself. Because I know with myself in my deconstruction journey, I grew up in a very Christian household. Some people would say, you can't be born into it, you need to be born again. It's like, no, I was born into it. I was an infant, like, when I was in it. But it's having to figure out, like, do I still believe what I believe because I actually believe it? Or do I believe it because it's comfortable? And because, like, my family believes it? Like, and I think that's, I guess, that part of rebuilding that I personally am in right now.
Yeah, and that's, like, hard because, like, this is the thing about, like, deconstruction, reconstruction, what have you, is the family system plays a huge part in it. Huge. Like, you know, we talk about churches, but, like, a lot of us, and I'm not going to say all of us because that's not everybody's truth, but a lot of us come from, like, these really religious families. When you're doing this reconstructive work, it means having to reorient yourself in your family system differently. Like, and that's hard as hell. Like, I mean, I've had conversations with both of my parents over the last few years where they have both almost verbatim have said to me, when did you stop believing what we taught you to believe? I am in my 30s. And for them to be very devout people, my dad's still a minister, my mom is still, like, very much a woman of faith. And it's not that I don't have faith, it's that my faith looks different. And my dad, you know, God bless, is, like, a little bit more open to some of the things that I believe that, like, my mother doesn't. And, like, even if he doesn't understand, he makes space for the fact that, like, well, I still see, like, the fruit, right? Like, it's still, like, that Holy Spirit bearing fruit that he sees and he's cool with. My mom, however, like, she hasn't said it outright. I'm fairly sure my mama thinks I'm a heretic. We had a conversation recently where I don't think I didn't tell her I didn't believe in hell. That would have, like, sent her over. My dad knows that, though. But we had a conversation about something, and I'm like, that's just not my theology anymore. And she's like, well, I'm going to pray for you to find the truth. I'm like, no, thank you. Because, like, you're now praying for me against, like, without my consent for something I don't want and that doesn't serve me anymore. But for her, that's an act of faithfulness. But there's also now a boundary that I've had to draw around things of a spiritual nature with her, because, like, you praying for me for something, for me to be bound in a way that I was loosed from, like, I don't want that. But that's hard because this means that there are certain things spiritually we can't talk about anymore. There are certain conversations, ways of praying, you know, we're just not on the same page. And that's difficult because that means that our relationship is different. And it has to be, because who I am is different. And what I believe is so divergent that it is, to some degrees, a threat to what she believes.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a couple of family members listen to our last episode, which was basically the breakdown of Genesis 1 and 2. And a lot of the feedback that I got from it was just, oh, I didn't know any of these things. I don't know what I think about these things now. And I was just like, ha ha. Like, there's a part of me that's like, ha ha ha. But also, it's that other part where it's like, yeah, like, I've had the privilege and way too much time on my hands this year to do that research. But a lot of people have believed a literal Genesis story, or kind of literal Genesis story, their entire lives. And it's hard to unlearn those things. And
especially,
it's kind of having to be that, like, agree to disagree sort of narrative.
Especially when, like, the idea that it is literal is, like, usually connected to, like, certain theological concepts. And so that's part of why it's also hard to break away from.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, like, hell, right? If I don't believe these things, I go to hell. Like, I mean, like, when I came out as queer, like, that was something that my dad and I had a conversation about, was, like, if he could ever be fully accepted of me as a queer person, because he was afraid that God was going to, like, lose respect for him. And we had, and my dad's, like, giving me consent to share these things publicly, because he's like, if it helps people, like, learning from our journey, then, like, he wants, like, them to do that. But, like, yeah, he struggled with that for a really long time. But that's why it's, like, because the consequence of unbelief, the consequence of questioning in some communities, right? Just asking the question, like, not even changing your mind, just asking, like, saying, like, hey, I don't know, like, that is enough to send you, like, to eternal damnation. And who wants to be, like, in hellfire and brimstone and being poked with, like, a pitchfork for, like, all eternity? Because, like, that's the image of hell that most people conjure up.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's the consequence.
I guess you mentioned coming out to your dad. do you want to, or are you comfortable talking more about your coming out experience journey?
Oh yeah. So I tried to come out the first time about like 15 or 16. That didn't go well, and that's where the place of repression came in. Like I shared with my dad that at the time I thought I was bisexual, and he's like, "You're not, because that's not what we believe." And I was like, "That's not what I am, because that's not what we believe." And so I repressed for years. And when I say years, I was, deeply repressed until I was about 29. And so from 15 or 16, I can't remember exactly when it was, but from then until 29, I was not even out to myself. And like, I would reframe attraction, right? It's just like, oh, that's just a girl crush. Like, no, you like that woman. Yeah. That's what that is. Girl crushes aren't real. But like, I would reframe attraction like to people of different genders. Before I finally like came to a place when I was 29, I met someone, was very attracted to them, and I was like, oh, this is a problem. And then they end up being like everywhere where I was, which was like super funny because I met them in a completely different state, like an actual like physical state, 1,000 miles away from like where I actually lived. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. But I couldn't run from it anymore. I couldn't deny it. I'm like, okay, this is attraction. Crap. And even at that point in time where I was already like affirming of like other people who were in the LGBTQ community and was doing like advocacy work at that point in time, like it's one thing to accept things for others. It's another to accept them for yourself. And some of that self-acceptance was about family. It was about like, is my family gonna like still want me? Are they still gonna love me? Are they gonna stand by me? And I didn't know the answer to that question because, again, I come from a really like religious family, and some people were super, super like encouraging when I came out. So it took me about a year's time to come out like to family and close friends before I came out publicly. And the decision to come out publicly was definitely, it was decisive. I, at this point, was already, like, doing work within, like, the Christian, like, speaking world and writing and whatever. And I'm like, I don't see that many Black queer women, like, out here, especially not, like, younger Black queer women, like, who were just, like, out. And so I made the decision to be out because I knew that, like, I wanted people to see that it's possible for you to be really faithful and, like, love this Jesus dude and really be, like, immersed in the justice world and also be, like, hella queer and also hella Black. And so that's why I came out publicly when I did in 2016. So I'm not a baby queer. I'm a toddler queer. I'm a little older. But yeah, like I have only been out publicly for about 5 years. And it's been a journey because like coming out's like such a, it's almost like, what do they call those things? It's almost oxymoronic because you're constantly coming out.
Yeah.
Like, it's especially if you're someone who is like omnisexual, right? Like you're not just gay, you're not just heterosexual. Like if you're any type of like queer and like or fluid, like I am pansexual, and so I'm constantly having to explain to people what the hell that means. I just like people. It's the easiest way to put it. And, and gender doesn't really come into account like when I am attracted to someone. It's just like, oh, they're dope. Okay. But, you're always coming out like in a new environment. Like people make assumptions about, you for many reasons, like, what they assume about your gender presentation, about who your partner is. Lots of people think I'm a lesbian because my partner is a lesbian. Like, just because my fiance is, like, lesbian doesn't mean that I am.
Oh,
and so...
Sorry to interrupt. Is that why part of your, at the end of the episode, we're also going to mention this too, you have, like, a line of merch that you have now on Etsy, and some of the shirts are, like, I'm not gay but my partner is, or I'm not bi but my partner is, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
That's where it came from. It's like, I'm not a lesbian, but my partner is. Because, like, everyone, like, I mean, like, there's so many people, and you're like, wait, you're not? No. Like, I have my identity separate from her. Yeah. And, like, technically we're a mixed orientation relationship. And there's just a difference in the way that we've had to orient the world because of how our attractions are configured. And we talk about it sometimes. We talked about it a lot more when we first started dating. But, I mean, it's hard because... you know, and this is something that people like within the bi plus community deal with. It's the invisibilization. Like, you know, people think that when we're with our partner that we have the identity they have, or an identity that's complementary to their own. And it's like, that's not always the case. Like, we are our own people. Like, some of us are other. Like, we're bi, we are pan, we are many things, but not necessarily what our partners are. And so that's a whole other thing. I've rambled a bit there.
Absolutely. And like, I've seen that so much lately, and I'm trying to be a lot more cognizant of that too. And I hope that that's something that like the LGBTQ plus community can just figure out at large, is like what you were saying, like the bi spectrum. So like bi people, pan people, poly people, like it doesn't, like your identity isn't erased based on who you're with. Like, and especially like, even like maybe with like people who are bi, who are in heterosexual relationships, it's like, it doesn't make that person or those people any less bi.
But they're also not in heterosexual relationships.
They're
in hetero. They're in hetero hearing relationships, or assumed.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I meant. I realized I said that. I was like, that's an oxymoron.
No worries. But I mean, like, I'm glad that you had like kind of slipped up there and like said that, because that's what people think. And, you know, in the same way we talk about like, you know, in the same way we talk about like heteronormative relationships, there's also homonormative relationships. Yeah. And like, in folks who are bi plus, those of us who are omnisexual, like we fuck the game up for folks. And sorry if you're not supposed to cuss on this show, but like that's what it is.
You're fine.
Like, we totally screw with stuff for people, because like, I feel like I've heard this so much. Like, when folks are like bi or pan or fluid or queer, like, we're told, you know, it's like, oh, well, you're just really like this until. It's like, no, this is my actual factual identity. Like, I am attracted to people like of these genders, or gender's not a factor. And like, it is possible. Like, I don't have to just like X person in order to have a valid identity, like as a sexual being. Like, what? No. Yeah. And this also includes our siblings who are ace and who are gray, like who are somewhere in that asexual spectrum. Yeah. Like, it is also valid for them to have little or no attraction to people, or that attraction needs space to build. Yeah. But like, we all get invisibilized because we're not like easily put in a box.
Yeah, and I've seen it, it's pretty bad too, like from what I've seen, like especially on like the lesbian side and like gay men specifically, like you'll see sometimes like, oh, I don't want to date a bi person or a pan person, and it's like, that's a like, dumb thing. Like
there's some overlap too between like that and like trans exclusionary folks, you know, particularly, just so you know, Alicia, the part of the current culture at Hollins, there are like some TERFs, and like last year there was like a little bit of drama about like someone tweeting publicly like, I hate bisexuals, like a student who tweeted that, and there's just
well, the TERFy stuff doesn't like surprise me. Like, we've had it out in like in alumni groups over that, and we're like, you will not like exclude the siblings, because trans folks have always been at Hollins. Like, this is the beauty of like of single sex institutions, is it gives people the protection to be able to like figure out who they really are or are not. Yeah. And then they transition, and like in a lot of women's colleges that aren't exclusively for women anymore, by nature of like gender being a lot more complicated than people like give it credit for sometimes, are dealing with this. But like, I think this is where students and faculty and staff and alum alike band together, and it's like, you will not treat our siblings like this. Like, absolutely. Stop being an ass. Like, you're given the space to be young and to figure out who you are. Let other people have the same thing in a way where they can be protected.
Yeah. I'm really grateful that I did get to discover part of who I was at Hollins. But of course, the first year, I had this memory that I wanted to bring up with you. So in 2016, you gave a talk at Hollins about like gender and sexuality and stuff, but of course I did not attend that because I was still repressed evangelical. And I remember specifically like looking at the poster for the event, like seeing your name and reading the bio and everything, and like then I remember like my immediate response was being like a little bit afraid, like, which is of course very representative of like the trauma that I went through and everything. So But then the next year, Susan Cottrell spoke at Hollins, and I did attend that. So, and that was very good.
Susan's really sweet. Oh, okay. So part of me is just like, oh, that's so sad, but also part of me wants to joke you. I'm like, so April, we could have met in person a long time ago, but but no, but that's the thing. It's like when we are in a place where we know that it's okay to claim parts of who we are, it is scary. Like, because like, especially like when you're in the place of like, of being repressed and like fearing that who you are is a sin, right? Like, not even what you do is sinful, but just who you are. And many folks who are evangelical or evangelical adjacent, but like, not even just that. Like, I mean, it's all parts of Christendom, I think, who wrestle with these questions. Like, it's super, super scary because you're afraid that like it's like the slippery slope that everyone warns you about, right? It's like, if I go, like, what's going to happen? And then also sometimes people can be antagonistic. And like, you know, you had no way of knowing like that first year that I wasn't going to be like a complete like douche. Like, you had no way of knowing. I could have been someone who was like antagonistic and just been like, screw religion, even though like Jenny was like very clear about bringing me there to like talk about like how to bring these things together. But it's possible like it could have been a bait and switch, right? But you just don't know. And it's okay for folks to be afraid and to have reservations and also to work through those things, because eventually you did, and you got to meet with a very nice person like who does a lot of really important parent work around this, because families need support too. It's not just us. You know, when someone who's LGBTQ comes out, their family system also, like, again, the family system changes. And sometimes in order for families to best support, you know, their loved one, they need supports like that, like that Susan offers, like through her organization.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate, though, with the, like, seeing that, Alicia's speaking at my school, and I don't know if I definitely resonate with that on the level of the musical Fun Home came out while I was in college and in the middle of my sexuality awakening, and I loved it, but I was like, I can't listen to this. If I listen to this, I'll be gay.
Which
crazy. Is so dumb, because I knew that wasn't the case for any of that, but it was that thing of like, if I can't see it, it can't see me, and then a year later,
so that
very much out.
Yeah. That same semester where I was hesitant to go, like, and I decided not to go to your talk, I was reading Fun Home, believe it or not.
Look at this full circle.
And so I listened to the Fun Home soundtrack the weekend after the 2016 election, and I remember specifically like turning on the song Changing My Major, and I think at the time I was listening to it without headphones, but then I heard the word sex and I like paused and like I got all like just hearing the word sex, like this just like, oh my god, that just got me all hot and bothered for some fucking reason.
I mean, but also, I mean, like, we got to talk about how purity culture comes in this, right?
Yeah,
because like it's like sex. Gasp. Like, it's like, of course, because in the same way that, like, you know, LGBTQ identities are repressed, all sexuality is repressed. Other than after you get married, like,
and then
to your heterosexual partner.
Yeah, and then, like, once you get married, you have to be an expert at it. Like, no questions. Like, once you're in the marriage bed, boom, you do it, and you do it well.
Look, no. I remember hearing horror stories, but like some of them were like low-key funny, but also like really terrible. But like about people like being like coming from these like super like, you know, restrictive communities and being expected to know things about their bodies that they were never taught. And so they were married for years and not having children. Come to find out they weren't having sex. They didn't know what sex was, or sometimes they thought sex was kissing because they were told that kissing leads to sex, so they thought that kissing was sex because they didn't have sex education. And it's like terrible and mildly amusing because it's absurd, but also super sad.
Yeah, like I had the dichotomy, obviously, of like learning purity culture in church, but I went to a public school where they didn't actually teach us about sex, but we learned all about STDs. So I was way more afraid of like getting STDs, but I didn't know what sex was. You know, I was like, I don't want to get gonorrhea, but I didn't even know how that would work in general because I didn't know. I was like, I don't know. I'll just never date. It's fine.
So I am very grateful that my public school did give us like proper sex ed. They were
lucky.
like, you know, and about birth control options. Like, yeah. Very grateful for that. Even though, of course, the church was still, the church's hold of me was still strong, so that I didn't really, you know, I was still like, oh, gotta save myself.
Yeah.
Same. Like, I had good sex education once I got to high school. In middle school, it was bad because I was at the Jesus school, and they refused. Like, I remember we were so excited, right? Like, we had, like, flipped ahead in the health book, and we were, like, super pumped, and they're like, you're not mature enough for this. People were already screwing by then. Like, folks were engaging in all types of, like, unsafe sexual behavior because there was no guidance. So many of us were, like, in these church communities where our parents were like, just stay chaste. It's like, but what happens, like, when you have all these hormones flying? Like, let people know what to do with their bodies. Let people know what their bodies, like, do naturally. Like, just talk about bodies and, like, help people not be ashamed. But,
yeah, and it's that similar thing, too, of, like, you can't avoid, like, if you avoid it, it's not going to go away. Like, if you just, like, close your eyes and go, like, la, 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 like, I'm not going to teach you about sex, therefore you won't know what it is and you'll never do it, and hooray. It's like, no, it's going to happen. Like, I want my future kids, when they become sexually active, I want them to know everything and maybe even a little bit too much, so they know exactly what they're getting into. Like, I don't want them to do the thing and then have a million questions afterwards or be harmed by that. Like, it gets like that, like, just gets, it gets me so frustrated.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, and it's because we've seen the harms, right, in different ways. So for, you know, I mean, it's interesting to, like, to be at this place where I'm in my mid-30s now. Because it's like, I definitely have seen the harms, like, you know, of, like, younger folks. But I'm also seeing, like, older folks who are, like, afraid to admit that they don't know things. Or the toll that it takes on people's marriages when, you know, they've been married, like, 20 years. And because they grew up in purity culture and got married at, like, somewhere between the ages of, like, 17 and 22. Like, and, you know, this has been the only partner they've had. And where, like, sexual dissatisfaction is, like, an issue, but also there's, like, a mistrust of therapy, right? Because you don't talk about your problems. And so they're not getting the supports they need in order to be sexually satisfied. Like, all these things are connected. And folks are just, like, not as happy as they could be. It sucks.
And like, you know, it's bad because, like, Josh Harris, who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye, like, he renounced his book. You know, it's bad when the author of this modern, like, courting culture has renounced the thing that so many, like, evangelicals modeled their dating lives or lack thereof off of, when he's like, I'm so sorry for all of the harm I've caused.
But he was also, like, 22 when he wrote the book.
Yeah, like it's like, why did we make a 22-year-old the expert in all things dating? Like, I didn't know any of it.
Well, we didn't know that. Because, like,
that's fair.
I Kissed Dating Goodbye was around when I was in college. And it came out, I want to say, like, in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
And the thing that's so unfortunate about it is, you know, he fit the bill for so much of, like, what that movement wanted him to fit, right? He was young and in love and blah, blah, blah. And, like, it was the age of some of the pastors who were in these churches. The challenge is, like, and this is, like, no shade to, like, to even y'all, because, like, you know, April, I know, like, you're in your earlier 20s, and I think that you probably might be too, but, like, your brain literally isn't fully developed until you're, like, 26 or 20, like, somewhere between 26 and 28. That's when your brain stops growing. It's like, why the fuck? Like, would you at 22, like, there's so much, and I say this, like, there's so much I didn't know in my 20s. Shit, there's stuff that I'm just figuring out now, including the fact that, like, things stop working in your 30s, y'all. Your body just starts to hurt a lot. But all of that being what it is, like, there's just so much developmentally that you just don't have in hand at 22. It's like you're right. Like, you have no business telling anybody how it's supposed to work. You got, like, 2 years max of marriage under your belt. The fuck are you gonna tell anybody?
Yeah.
Like, what?
I had a lot of friends who were Mormon when I was in high school, and so many of them got married at, like, 18, 19. I would get friend requests from people being like, whose last name is this? And it's like, oh, they got married 5 years ago. And meanwhile, like, here I am at 26. You were very close on the age, but here I am at 26. Just being like, I could not have gotten married at 8. Like, I can't even fathom that. Like, I didn't know who I was at that point.
No.
Like, nobody does.
Like, Good Lord.
But this is also where you have folks like who unfortunately like get divorced like in their late 20s, early 30s, because you undergo so many evolutions like of self. Like, I know who I am right now at 35. It's not who I'm going to be when I'm 40.
100%.
Like, it's just, it sucks. It sucks. But, like, I'm glad that, like, he's renounced it, kind of. But, like, even in his renunciation, it was, like, kind of trash. It's just like, okay, Josh Harris, like, still, go do your healing work. Like, you still have work to do,
My feeling is that, like, go do your healing work, but maybe don't try to have the microphone. Like,
also that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of us, you know, I mean, like, I actually can talk about, like, relationships, like, that completely ruined. Like, that book in particular, and, like, others that are like it. Like, I remember, like, dating somebody off and on throughout my, like, late teens and, like, most of my 20s. And just, I remember, like, there was this moment where I was just so rude and so mean to this guy. And he totally didn't deserve it. But it was because of the stupid shit that I was reading in, like, Josh Harris's book. Like, when you're saying that, like, I shouldn't hold hands with this person. And I remember, like, literally, we went on this date, and it was, like, it was a date from hell for a number of different reasons. I fell asleep on it. It was really bad. But anyways, but he tried to hold my hand, and I was like, no, I don't even want to hold someone's hand. And in back of mine, because Josh Harris says, right? So it's, like, kind of background. And he went to hold my hand, even though, and so there is a crossing of a boundary there. But the boundary was put there because I was receiving really crap, like, advice from someone who shouldn't have been given it. And I remember, like, that caused me to say some horrific things.
Yeah.
Or motivated me to, rather. Let me not put it on cause. Like, but it motivated me to. And things that I can't remember what they were, but I do remember we didn't actually talk for a number of years. And we started dating again later in our 20s, but, like, there was just, like, a lot of muck that, like, could have, like, not been slung if that just didn't exist. If, like, people could just be free. And that's really what it, like, boils down to me about, like, Josh Harris or, like, Eric and something Ludi. There's so many people who have, like, written these books, including, like, you know, folks like Heather Lindsay. She's, like, a black woman who does a form of, like, purity culture, like, now. There are so many, like, these other folks who do this work, and they just need to go heal and be well for themselves, and, like, stop trying to control people in their bodies in order to, like, I don't know if it's, like, trying to artificially bolster the numbers of the church, or think that, like, I don't quite know what the motivation behind it is. I just know that people need to, like, be free to explore themselves, and, like, literally explore themselves, right? Because masturbation is, like, all the way, like, not allowed in, like, these spaces. But, like, to explore themselves and explore others, and to understand, like, what their boundaries are or aren't. Like, we need the freedom and the space to do that. And, like, so down to purity culture, boo.
I remember the first time that I made out with a woman. One of the things that was so beautiful about it is I was like, oh my god, like, purity culture really is wrong. Like, I had already sort of believed that, but, like, experientially I was like, oh, like, I'm like kissing this woman, and, like, it was getting really steamy, but, like, I didn't suddenly want to just, like, have sex with her, you know, which is, like, what purity culture taught me was going to happen, that if that I could so easily go too far if I wasn't careful. And it's like, well, no, because you can actually, like, I don't know, I was being intuitive in my body, and I knew what I wanted, and so I was just able to choose that. And it was obviously, like, you know, obviously also, like, the focus on consent in that experience was also very important, which is something that, like, purity culture doesn't talk about consent.
No talk about consents or like, personal boundaries or anything like that.
No, agency isn't a thing there for anyone.
Ugh, it's ridiculous.
It's icky.
I know. I just feel gross. And I remember we had to read this book in my youth group called Dateable, and it was by a guy named Justin Lookadoo, I think, and it turned out he was an absolute creepo. But anyone that writes a purity culture book is questionable at best. But I remember reading that book, and I thought not great things about people in my life who had blossomed, I guess, or were sexually active at an early age. Like, I would never vocalize it, but in my brain it was like these slut-shamey sort of, like, that person is, like, giving themselves away. And, like, there's a part of me, like there's a part of me that to this day where I'm like, you know what, like, that was what I was taught, like, I can't, like, that was what I was taught, but also, like, I never want to think this about another person ever again. I want, like, rather, I want to fight against that rhetoric, because I joke, like, I was, like, the PDA police in school, and it was just, like, I don't want to be that, I don't want to make people feel that shame about who they are and their bodies and what they do, and it's just, I want to reconcile that with people that I meet in the future, but also, there is that soft spot, because that was all I knew at that point.
And I think that that's a place of grace for others, right?
Yeah.
It literally is all some other folks now. And I think that that's like the beauty of like being where we are, where we aren't who we used to be and don't hold the beliefs that we used to have, is that we can impart grace. Like, I never forget where I come from. Like, it honestly helps me for being like a complete like a-hole to people sometimes, because there are people whose views are more conservative than mine, and even things that I realize or I recognize to be absolutely like unquestionably untrue, but I'm still like careful in how I navigate the conversations, because I recognize that they're coming from a place of like genuineness, right? They genuinely believe these things, and sometimes that leaves space for us to talk about stuff and for them to ask questions, because I am like careful about it, and other times people are antagonistic, but like I can't control the people, I can control me. And I think that like that's the thing. And I think that's the thing where humility comes into play. It's like folks, especially who have dealt with like that evolution of self, we have to just constantly be humble, because like somebody having patience is how we got to be where we are.
That's one thing I have to kind of remind myself of, is like when someone doesn't understand queer theology or more progressive theology, or just like anything outside of like evangelicalism, it's that thing of like, I could be snarky, I really could be right now, but I know that I would not have responded well to that if I was in that position 10 years ago. I'll do my best to like just be sincere and just be honest, and either they take it and think about it with a grain of salt, or they reject it, and it's not my job to snark them into my way of thinking.
And it's cool when you can do that work on your own. Like, sometimes, like, you can't. Like, I'm going to be real with you. Like, there are times where I just want to be super snarky. And it's like the Holy Spirit has to be like, Alicia. I was like, okay, my bad. I will get that. I will get that spiritual prompting. Like,
I think like that's
fine. It's a fine line. And I think for me, it's been hard to figure out, particularly like when I think about, in the past, particularly like specific personal relationships, like that, in the process of my deconstruction journey have like just gotten totally fucked, and like I haven't really it's been hard to like deal with that and not be like snarky and bitter and cynical. It's a hard it's hard to navigate, and I'm still trying to figure out how to be more like compassionate and humble, but still like firm in my convictions in those situations.
I mean, sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. And I know that sometimes I get it wrong. Like, there are times where, like, because I live for, like, I don't like being petty all the time, but I like being professionally petty sometimes. And I'm realizing that also extends to when people, like, mess with my fiance. And so there are some times, like, where she's, like, really big into posting on public forums. Which is like, I'm like, why do you talk to these strangers who live near us? Because you know that where we are situated in the world does not always let these conversations go well. But sometimes, like, the conversation will just, like, hit a peak where I'm like, okay, crack knuckles. And I just, like, go off on someone. But, like, I'm very exacting. But that's usually when the conversation's already past the point of redemption anyway. And so it's just like, knuckle, crack, let me go off. But other times it's just like, I don't know. It's, you figure it out. Like, sometimes you can't help it because people just really push their buttons, and we still are human. But, I don't know. Yeah. It's such a learning curve.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly like that's like almost like the God moment, or like that moment where it's like, okay, like pause, like take that pause for 3 seconds, like, will this be beneficial, or will this just be like noise into the ether? And I think noise into the ether is very cathartic. It's very helpful, like on a personal level, but it's like, that's almost like Christ-like behavior, is being able to be like, I'll coming at this from a graceful place and coming at this from a loving place sometimes just means I'm not going to engage right now.
That's it. That's like, seriously, that's it. Sometimes it just means you're not going to talk on something. There's a lot of times, like, honestly, I'll just like look at something and sit and choose silence, because I just know, like, there's nothing productive I'm gonna, like, I'm not gonna give anything to this conversation.
Yeah.
So let me just walk away and watch Bob's Burgers burgers and go about my day.
One of those friendships that I mentioned that, hasn't really ended well in the process of deconstruction, our last conversation, I walked away in silence because I was like, you're not going to care about what I have to say in this moment. So...
And you know what? Sometimes that has to be the case. And some things, honestly, even in people, again, like who would say that they're hold certain beliefs or not, just sometimes it's just not worth it. I'm just going to be real and name this. And one of the ways that I will name that it's not worth it is when people start like bringing up not just what you believe, but also who you are as a part of the argumentation. Mm-hmm. And so I had a situation recently. Actually, I think I talked about this in my thesis. But I am one of the contributors to A Rhythm of Prayer that was edited by Sarah Bessey. And there was a lot of controversy a few months ago over one of the prayers written by Dr. Shaniqua Walker-Barnes. And it was like a whole bunch of online hubbub about, her prayer that was actually, it was a prayer of, what is it? Why do words evade me right now when I need them? It was an imprecatory prayer, right? Like one that starts off like in this kind of place of grieving, but turns in a place and recognizing like what God can do with something, right? And so she starts a prayer like, God, please help me please help me to hate white people. And at the end of this prayer, she ends up in this place of she asked for like release, like for the care, but then asked God to kind of like transmute her pain at the end. But all like folks who were like just bad faith actors stories, she said to hate white people. It's like, that's actually not what she said, but go off. One of the people who went off was like a friend of mine, actually from Hollins. And this was actually a really painful thing for me. So we were like friends, but like not super close, but we knew each other since freshman year. And we are no longer in a relationship because one of the things that she wanted to do was like argue my humanity as a Black person. And try to talk about like Jesus basically being colorblind and how we need to just all just like kumbaya this and like you have to like be sensitive to bigots. And I'm just like, fuck that noise. It's like, you're not going to tell me that Jesus, like, who flipped tables over inequality, who, like, stopped speaking literally in the text when he was in front of adversaries at a certain point. You are not going to tell me that this Jesus would be in solidarity with people treating me like shit because I'm Black and cops killing Black folks with impunity. You will not. And I will not argue my humanity with you. And, I mean, she kept trying to, like, twist the scriptures in particular. So this is someone who is of the same, like, purported belief as me. But, like, trying to, like, literally twist scripture and twist theology. And it's like, ma'am, I'm in seminary. Like, not to, like, be, like, elitist in an educational sense, but, like, you are not working with the same deck of cards that I am here. Like, I have tools that you don't have at your disposal, as well as, like, the lived experience of being Black. Like, no. Absolutely not. And that was the last conversation we had. And it was, like, several months ago. Because... she was willing to, argue my humanity away, like using her interpretation of scripture. And we never going to do that one. And so some things just aren't worth you going there. Some things aren't worth your grace. Some things aren't worth your care. And and you discern, the whens and the wheres, but some arguments are so fundamentally fucked that it doesn't make sense for you to do that labor because it will be done in vain.
Yeah, and it's stupid because I think people will frame that as, like, it's just a difference of opinion. And it's like, no.
That. My life isn't your opinion.
No, toppings on pizza are opinion. The humanity of other people is not an opinion. No.
Not an opinion.
Like, either you are on the correct side of humanity or you're not.
Or not.
Yeah. It's...
like, you don't like pineapples... I get to not worry about being shot in my home by the cops. Like, not the same thing.
Not at all. It's, I'm really sorry that happened to you. It's just, so, especially, like, coming from a supposed friend. Like, that's,
and this is someone who, we'd intentionally chosen. I mean, like, social media makes it easier. But, like, this is someone, like, who I would talk to on occasion. Like, and we've been friends since... we were 2004 when we started college, but you know what? The friendship ended that day because, like, there's some things that I will not, we're just not going to certain places. And I think that, like, it's okay for people who experience marginalization because of identity, because of race or sexuality or gender or disability or, like, whatever facet of their identity that folks would try to marginalize and malign them through, for them to say, it's like, I'm not doing this shit. not, and you don't have to.
Yeah.
Let someone with identity privilege you don't have, like, do that work with them. It's not yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, honestly, this is what I told our community to do. Like, Hollins has a number of, like, groups, and, like, I let people know. It's like, Hollins people, do y'all work. Y'all know who this is. You've been in a relationship with her. Y'all be in a relationship with her and gather her. Because, like, this isn't my job, but let's just let it be known. This is the shit that she did today.
Yeah.
And folks were willing to have that conversation with her. Like, this is where community is important for sure. Because I leaned into them when I was really sad and pissed. And then I wrote about it in my thesis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, honestly, the events of last summer have really, like, shown people and other, like, organizations and stuff, like, their true colors and where they truly stand on, like, or, like,
I'd say no.
Okay.
Well,
I say
I guess
no.
if you're, I mean, I think, yeah, some of like the, you know, statements about equity and diversity that people put out are like not.
No, yeah, and like,
it's not.
Yeah, like, I guess, like, in my, like, the way I'm thinking about it is, like, I used to perform at a bunch of theaters, and all of them were like, we stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, and then people of color who worked at these theaters were like, no, you don't. We need to talk about this. And I think, yeah, like, I don't think people making, like, posting, like, a black square, which I will say I was very guilty of, and I realized it was very dumb now, but it was, like, people, like, posting these things, and then having the communities that they're supposedly standing for saying, no, you've never stood for us. Like, it was learning those things where it was just like, damn, I can't in good faith support this anymore. Like,
but I mean, but I think one of the things that's happened over the last year is that there's been a lot of performativity afterwards, right?
Yeah,
like, so folks even saying, I'm going to shift. It's like, okay, so when are you going to start? Because, you know, literally, like, a friend of mine had mentioned actually night before last, that 1% of the pledges that people made after George Floyd were killed were actually, like, completed. So all of these organizations made all of these pledges of money. 1% of them actually followed through. Jeez. People are full of shit.
Yeah.
They are masters of performing. Masters.
Yeah. And
like, culture hasn't changed. Policies haven't changed. Procedures haven't changed. And then you have insult to injury. And I say this because part of my work is doing, like, justice and equity work. I do justice education consulting. And I, for giggles, took a DEI class, diversity, equity, and inclusion class. Because it was free. And I wanted to see what people were being taught, right?
Yeah.
Y'all, 120,000 plus people were in a free class being taught horrid things. Like, how in the deuce does your session on disability, how is it full of ableist language by disabled people? Like, it was the most ridiculous thing in the universe.
Oh my God.
But this is what happens when you have 120,000 consumers here. Like, it's a shit show. It's a shit show. And, like, and people need to, like, learn how to enter into authentic, real, embodied relationships that are tempered by solidarity. And that solidarity isn't a buzzword. Like, solidarity, I was taught, is when you see someone who's experienced an oppression that you do not have to endure by nature of your personhood. You choose to get on the ground. If they are forced to the ground, you get on the ground, and you should feel a gravel in your belly because you are right there with them. That is what solidarity is. And so, you know, I mean, right now it's like June, so it's like Pride Month. One of the things I'm, like, so tired of is seeing all these things with fucking rainbows everywhere. Where are you supporting queer and trans lives? Target, like, Walmart, Bank of America. Like, you're asking for cops to be at. Yeah, that's what the fuck it is. It's rainbow capitalism. Yeah. Like, yay, let's throw, like, and I can keep going on with this one.
Yeah.
Having the cops at Pride. Why the fuck are the police at Pride? Pride started because black and Latina trans women threw bricks at the cops as a form of resistance. Yeah. Why are we arguing if, like, Officer, like, Rainbow gets to be there with the No. Why? Why are we having this conversation? But we're having it because people don't know histories. We're having it because people don't understand what pride is and why pride is still necessary. We have sweeping legislation that is targeting not just trans people, but trans children. Like, we need pride. We need liberation now.
Yeah. And it's so stupid when people bring up things like we don't need a whole, like, month for pride. We don't need, like, there's, like, gay people aren't oppressed. And it's like, you know what? Like, has it gotten better? Kind of. But look at all of that anti-trans legislation, all of that, like it's being said by people who've never had to wake up and question if their rights would still be there the next day.
And
like,
and also, like, not only is there the anti, like, LGBTQ legislation, I mean, obviously, like, any LGBTQ legislation is still met with huge backlash. Like, in my home county, there's this policy by the school board that will actually be more supportive of trans and gender expansive students, and of course some of the pushback on it has been awful. So yeah.
But even, you know, I think one of the things that, like, makes me sad, and, like, this is where some of my work, you know, there are a number of people who are doing anti-racism work, and I think it's incredibly important, but I'm really doing the work internally and then also professionally to shift towards anti-oppression, because even if things are better, who are they better for? Like, when you see this person in your mind, like, who are these people? Because you're not going to tell me that, like, we are where we need to be because, you know, the gay couples who want to get married are cool. They can get married now. Like, that's not where it ended. Because at the end of the day, it's like LGBTQ people can still get fired from their jobs with no type of recourse. They can still not be treated by medical professionals if certain, like, legislation is allowed to be upheld. You know, people can be kicked out of their homes, kicked out of shelters, even if they don't have homes of their own. There are all these different things that happen to folks. 40% of kids who are on the street are LGBTQ. The majority of those are Black, gay, and gender expansive youth. So, like, who is it better for?
Yeah, and then people, like, especially when it comes to marriage equality, it's like, there's marriage equality now. It's like, not for disabled people, because there's also that thing of, like, when you're disabled, you end up, like, you don't get that help anymore from the government, even if your spouse is not making a lot of
benefits are gone,
which is like, because like, exactly like you were saying, like, okay, yes, queer people can get married now, but there are all these other things that we need to work on. And then, like, there's also, okay, like, marriage equality in theory, but we don't have marriage equality, like, if disabled people can't get married but lose all of their help and all their benefits and stuff like that. It's just,
if disabled folks, if, like, people who are asylees, refugees, immigrants aren't able to marry their partners without having to go through extraordinary measures to prove, quote unquote, that they are in fact, like, there's so many layers to this. But it's like, again, who has power, who has access, who has opportunity to push forward certain agendas? Who are we listening to? Who are we imagining?
Yeah, the work has to be intersectional. And as a closing question, Alicia, I wanted to ask you, I guess, what you're doing now and what you're hoping to do in the future now that you've graduated from Duke.
Yeah, so I am still consulting. So I'm doing justice education and consulting work. I'm thinking about starting some coaching, so, like, some more one-on-one stuff of, like, the version of what I do with, like, orgs. I am preparing to write my first book.
Congratulations!
That's amazing!
Thanks. I'm starting a new podcast, and I just launched an Etsy store. So, like, there's a lot of, and I'm getting married. Like, there's also that. There's a lot of newness in my world.
Yes.
So I'm super pumped about, like, the season that lies ahead. Like, there are ways that I'm going to definitely be doing more of what I've been doing in the past, but also some things that I'm going to be doing in new ways. Like, I've written 4 books. I've never written my own book. And so that's a new thing, like, totally. But podcasting, this will be my second go around. This will be my first solo show, though. So, yeah, I'm excited about that, too.
Yes. And please let us know when all those things come out, because I definitely want to promote it on all of our stuff. Just
yes.
We want to send support and love your way.
Yeah, so in our show notes, we will put the link to Alicia's new merch store, as well as all of her social media. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you so
thanks
much.
for having me, y'all. I've enjoyed this time with y'all.
We're working on an outro song. This is just the placeholder. Yeah.
I so deeply enjoyed that conversation with Alicia. You know, it's like despite like everything she's gone through, she just absolutely radiates joy, and it's so great to see that. Just her in all of her queerness and wonderful identity. She's so fun to talk to.
Absolutely. I'm kind of on a bit of an endorphin high from that because she's an amazing person to talk to. I feel so honored that we got to have this conversation with her.
So, you know, for the first few episodes of this podcast, we've been figuring out kind of what we want to do with like our outros or like how to end episodes. It's just kind of been awkward each time.
Yeah.
And so we kind of decided we're going to have this sort of time of like checking in and like sort of talking about cool, good things that are going on in our lives and possibly like what we're reading or watching. So Anna, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So fun highlight of this past week was I got to see one of my best friends after about a year and a half, and we got to go to a bar together. And I hadn't been to a bar since pandemic started. And the cool part about this bar is you have to be vaccinated to go. Like, you have to pre-register and show them your vax card. So we were very safe, and we didn't have to wear masks or anything because it was guaranteed everyone was vaccinated. I also wore bell bottoms, and I felt like a 70s disco queen the entire night. So
oh my god, I saw the photo on Instagram. You look fabulous. Ugh.
Thank you. I was like, if this is my first time going out in like a year and a half, I am going out in style.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for me, since the last time we recorded, I think, I got into graduate school.
Yes!
Yes, so although I'm not technically officially a theologian now, y'all, I'm gonna be.
Yes.
I'm going to be studying I'm going to be getting my master's in theology and culture at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Not this year, but next year. Deferring, because I gotta save money.
100%. That is fantastic. Congratulations.
Right now, one of the things I'm watching is Handmaid's Tale. It's still really rough and brutal as ever, honestly, but there are some good things going on. I'm not going to spoil things for people, but there are some happy moments.
I'm doing a rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender
Awesome.
Because I have been feeling in a cartoon-ish mood, but
I mean, you don't
what
need
better
an
than
excuse.
Avatar, honestly. You know what? Yeah, I don't need an excuse. It's a great show. It aired 15 years ago. It's aged brilliantly. Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yes. Y'all, so definitely stay tuned for our episode next month because we're going to have, and also our social media, because we're going to have some cool announcements coming up. We love being able to interact with all of you, and also, you know, if something cool happened in your week, you know, let us know. We really love getting to interact with our listeners.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we hope y'all have a great week.
Thank you so much for listening.